The elections in the United States and the outcome of the elections have made it clear that the division of society in the USA is much deeper than just the split into two major parties. Where, in your view, are the greatest distortions, and how can a new government of President-elect Biden overcome these divisions?
Yes, that's a great question. The divisions are definitely deeper and more systemic than just political partisanship and differences. I think there's a divide between rural and urban, between college educated and non-college educated, a division between working class and actually sort of lower white collar class and the upper managerial classes. It stems, I think, from economic problems, meaning that there's segments of American society that have been left behind by globalization, left behind by technology, the old jobs of like working in the factories. Those don't really exist anymore. People have to be more entrepreneurial. They have to be more self-starters. And so people benefit from that, and other people can't really access and participate in that sort of changed economy. I also think the divisions are cultural, meaning if you live in suburban or rural areas and you don't travel much outside the US, you're not connected to sort of the global mentality, globalized mentality. So there's this elite versus non-elite fights. Which have a long tradition in American society, going all the way back to Andrew Jackson, right? Who was sort of a populist figure, and when he came into office in the 1830s, in his inauguration, there was a party at the White House, and this is a little funny story. The party at the White House, and his supporters trashed the White House, and they had to put the kegs out into the garden in order so that the White House wouldn't be utterly destroyed. So you have this tension historically between urban and rural, suburban and urban, and educated, non-educated, and we have a 21st century version of that now.
And are these, let's say, splits are not also based on color? Still based on color?
Well, it's more than color. I don't think there are racial components to it. That's where you get some of the anti-immigration legislation. And sentiments personified by Trump. But there were minorities and Latinos that also supported those anti-immigration aspects. I think if you look at the rural areas, places like Kentucky, West Virginia, Mississippi, Arkansas, there's problems of drugs, high unemployment, and it's typically more white, rural, poor. It's not just African American and Latino, but there are pockets of poverty and classes of people left behind all throughout the U.S. I think it's more complex than just racial divides, more complex than just economics. It's a mixture of everything. It's very difficult to unbundle and tackle.
Yeah, and how do you see, let's say, the chances of President-elect Biden to overcome that during the next 4 years? Is that even possible?
It is possible. I think we need a miracle. Americans need a miracle. That'd be nice. 2020 has been a rough year for everyone. I think we should expect amazing things out of 2021. Biden, he comes from a working class background. He's known as someone that can work with the other side politically in Congress. He knows the Senate and Congress very well. I think bringing a team of competent managers into the executive branch will right off the bat make the federal government function a lot better, right? And will increase its competency. So that alone, I think, may change the tone. It won't overcome these divisions, but it will help alleviate them. Does that make sense? He may be able to compromise with the other party, with the Republicans, and get some tangible legislation and with healthcare, infrastructure, education, student debt relief. All those things could really go a long way to helping these problems. Will it happen? I'm not sure, but he has the ability. I mean, he has the mentality.
Observing American policy from Europe during President Trump's tenure, in particular in recent months, one has sometimes been struck stump by the open devaluation of democratic principles and the open questioning of democratic institutions such as electoral processes. How stable is the US democratic system?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's fairly stable, but it's transitioning. It's evolving, I would say, and it's evolving due to cultural change, right? It's not that these institutions are dying; they still exist, but they're changing, and the society at large is interacting in new ways with technology, Facebook, Instagram, etc., remote learning, all that type of stuff. And so what's happening is these old institutions like the church, like sort of a bipartisanship in Congress, those institutions, even sort of schools, are no longer functioning as the center of society, right? It's moved on. People have moved on to other areas and other formats. They become more atomized. Whether it's the media, they're getting their media personalized to their own tastes. So the media, the institution of the media, doesn't hold the role that it used to in society. So I think that's what's causing this institutional breakdown. I don't think it's a breakdown in rule of law and rule of order and belief in the American principles. I think it's a change in the format of how these things are expressed and how these ideas are expressed and interactions are expressed. You look at this election, even though Trump and his supporters use the court system and they protested the election and say it's fake, the system has worked, right? The court system has worked. There have been multiple checks. It's been an open process. Yes, there are problems in elections, or there's some irregularities that happens all the time. But I think the sort of the review process after the election has given me a little bit more faith that our institutions are healthy, right?
And finally, at the end, even Trump's Minister of Justice
right
acknowledged the outcome of the elections.
Right, and he's a huge supporter of Trump,
yeah.
And so like I think there is a rational policy making still going on in the U.S. that's based in American ideals. It's uglier than it used to be, right? It's harsher. Look, I think the problem is the politics of scarcity are more difficult than the politics of bounty, meaning the U.S. is relatively poor and there's more poverty within the U.S. There are rougher fights over resources and allocations and priority of policies, where the economy is booming and everyone benefits and the U.S. is growing in power and stature. It's easier to divide up the pie, so to speak. So that's what we're seeing.
But let's talk about American-European relations, especially relations between Germany and the USA. They have deteriorated dramatically under Trump. For me, this was illustrated as clearly as rarely before when Chancellor Merkel congratulated John Biden on his election victory a few weeks ago, and with no single word she mentioned the incumbent. Will be now, with the new presidency, a resurgence of good relations between Europe and America?
Sure, I think there will be, because of the change in tone in the Biden administration, the turn towards multilateralism, or the return towards multilateralism, a focus on cooperation with allies and partners. I think that's going to vastly improve U.S.-European, U.S.-German relations, right? You saw this during the George W. Bush years, very unpopular, particularly with Germany, right? And then once Obama came into office, there was a giant spike. And I remember the opinion polls coming out of Germany, Germans loved Obama, right?
They did,
much more than other European countries. I don't think Biden will have that same boost, because I think Europeans have become acculturated to the swings in American politics. So now they know we shouldn't fall in love again with another American, pro-European president. That's understandable. But I think relations will improve without a doubt. And Biden knows a lot of these foreign leaders. His policy team knows Europeans. So that in itself means they're not outsiders. They're in the club, and so the conversations about how to deal with global problems and mutual problems is going to start off from day one. So that will be a big improvement.
And what can Europe do to get it? How can Europe contribute to get a more coherent, democracy-oriented policy?
Well, I think that I've been amazed by a process that's already been going on within the EU and also within NATO. I mentioned NATO because there's a ministerial meeting right now. A reflection piece was presented to the foreign ministers yesterday. That's called NATO 2030. And it's a gigantic agenda for envisioning the transatlantic alliance over the next 10 years. And I think that sort of thoughtful work, planning, forecasting how Europe and the United States can deal with mutual problems, that work being done now is going to set the stage for all sorts of cooperative agendas, right? So Europe speaking more in a unified voice, having open and frank conversations with American partners will go a long way towards not just increasing a better atmosphere between transatlantic community, but actually creating policies that benefit both sides of the Atlantic. When Europe is divided and can't speak with one voice, when there's dissension within the EU and within NATO, that frustrates the United States. And so I think you're now going to have a willing US partner to get some work done. And I think Europeans, if they can coalesce together, which there are signs of that, we're going to see some really spectacular things, I would hope.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Wolff, Professor Wolff, for these really good insights, and hope to have you soon here in Bremen. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure, and please send my best to everyone at the University of Bremen. It's such a lovely place. I look forward to coming back very soon to Northern Germany.
Okay, take care. Ciao.
Okay, bye-bye. Ciao.